The dust devil swirled across the alkali flats like a demon's breath, and Grace Dalton wondered if this God-forsaken stretch of Texas desert would become her grave. The wagon wheel had cracked 3 miles back. Her horse had bolted during the night, and now the August sun of 1882 beat down on her shoulders with merciless intensity as she stumbled forward with no destination in mind, except away from the wreckage of her previous life. Her canteen had run dry that morning, her lips were cracked and bleeding, and when she finally collapsed onto the scorched earth, she closed her eyes and accepted that this was how her story would end. She did not know how long she lay there before the shadow fell across her face. Grace opened her eyes to slits, expecting a buzzard, but instead saw the silhouette of a man on horseback, his hat blocking the sun like a benediction. Through her delirium, she heard his voice, rough as gravel but somehow gentle, saying words she could barely process. Then strong hands lifted her and water touched her lips and she tried to drink but choked. "Easy now," the voice said. "Small sips, that's it." When her vision cleared enough to focus, Grace found herself looking into the weathered face of a man perhaps 28 or 30 years old, with sun-darkened skin and eyes the color of creek water. He held a canteen to her mouth with one hand while supporting her head with the other, and there was such concern in his expression that she felt tears prick her eyes. "Thought I'd lost you there for a moment," he said. "When I saw you lying in the dirt, I figured you were already gone. But I checked anyway and there was still breath in you. Where there's breath, there's a way. That's what my mama used to tell me." Grace managed to swallow another sip of water. "Who are you?" "Name's Xavier Quinn. I run cattle between here and El Paso." "You're about 10 miles outside of town, heading the wrong direction if you were trying to reach civilization." He studied her face with those remarkable eyes. "What's a woman doing out here alone?" "Leaving," Grace whispered. "Just leaving." Xavier did not press for more information. Instead, he fashioned a shelter from his bedroll and some mesquite branches, got her into the shade, and gave her more water along with some jerky that she could barely chew. He tended to her with the efficiency of someone accustomed to emergencies on the trail, but also with a tenderness that surprised her. When she finally felt strong enough to sit up on her own, the sun had moved considerably across the sky. "I've got to get you to town," Xavier said. "Can you ride?" "I think so." He helped her onto his horse, a sturdy bay gelding named Rust, then swung up behind her. Grace leaned back against his chest, too exhausted to worry about propriety, and felt his arm circle her waist to keep her steady. They rode in silence for a while, the horse's gait smooth and unhurried, and Grace found herself drifting in and out of awareness. "You running from something or toward something?" Xavier asked after a time. Grace considered lying but found she lacked the energy. "From, always from." "That's a lonely way to live. Lonelier to stay where you're not wanted." Xavier was quiet for a moment. "Well, I reckon everybody's wanted somewhere. Maybe you just haven't found the right place yet." They reached El Paso as the sun was setting, painting the adobe buildings in shades of orange and gold. Xavier took her directly to Dr. Morrison's house on Mesa Street, and the elderly physician examined her thoroughly while Xavier waited outside. The doctor pronounced her severely dehydrated and malnourished but otherwise unharmed, gave her some tonic, and told her to rest. "You have somewhere to stay?" Dr. Morrison asked. Grace shook her head. She had exactly $3.20 to her name, the remains of what she had taken when she fled her cousin's house in San Antonio. Her cousin's husband had made it clear that his hospitality came with expectations she would never meet, and so she had packed what little she owned and bought passage on a wagon train heading west. But the train had been attacked by bandits 2 days out, and in the chaos, Grace had ended up alone with an injured driver who died before they reached help. Dr. Morrison called Xavier back into the room. "This young lady needs a place to recover. Do you know of any respectable boarding houses with vacancy? Mrs. Chen's place on San Francisco Street usually has rooms," Xavier said. He looked at Grace. "I'll take you there and cover the first week's rent. You can pay me back when you're on your feet." "I cannot accept that," Grace protested. "Sure you can. Consider it a loan between neighbors." Xavier's expression was serious. "Besides, I cannot in good conscience leave you with nowhere to go. My mama would rise from her grave and box my ears." Despite everything, Grace felt a smile tug at her lips. "Your mama sounds like she was a formidable woman." "That she was. And she taught me to help folks when they need it, because you never know when you might be the one needing help." Mrs. Chen's boarding house was a 2-story building with a wide porch and surprisingly clean rooms. The proprietor, a Chinese woman in her 50s who had come to El Paso during the railroad boom, showed Grace to a small but comfortable room on the 2nd floor. Xavier paid for the week, shook Grace's hand formally, tipped his hat, and left. Grace watched him go from her window, this stranger who had saved her life and asked for nothing in return, and wondered if she would ever see him again. She saw him the very next morning. Grace had risen early, feeling considerably better after a night of actual sleep in an actual bed, and had ventured downstairs for breakfast. Mrs. Chen served eggs and rice and strong tea, and Grace was eating alone at the long dining table when Xavier appeared in the doorway, hat in hand. "Morning," he said. "Just wanted to check that you made it through the night all right." "I did. Thank you again for your kindness." It was nothing. But he did not leave. Instead, he shifted his weight from foot to foot, looking uncharacteristically uncertain. "I was wondering if you might like some company for breakfast. If that would be proper, I mean. Mrs. Chen's cooking is the best in town." Grace found herself nodding before she fully thought it through. Xavier's face brightened, and he took the seat across from her. Mrs. Chen brought him a plate without being asked, which suggested he was a regular customer, and they ate together in companionable silence for a few minutes. "So what will you do now?" Xavier asked finally. "Do you have family you can contact?" "No family worth contacting," Grace said. She explained about her cousin, carefully editing the worst details, and Xavier's jaw tightened. "Some men do not deserve the trust placed in them," he said quietly. "I'm sorry you went through that. It's over now. I need to find work. I can read and write and cipher, and I'm good with my hands. I was thinking perhaps a seamstress or a shop clerk position. The mercantile might be hiring. Old Mr. Peterson has been looking for help since his daughter got married and moved to Albuquerque. I could introduce you if you like." And so began an unlikely friendship. Xavier did introduce her to Mr. Peterson, who hired her on the spot when she demonstrated her neat handwriting and quick arithmetic. The work was not glamorous, but it was honest and the pay was fair. Grace settled into a routine of work and rest, slowly rebuilding her strength and her savings. And through it all, Xavier was there. He stopped by the mercantile at least 3 times a week, ostensibly to purchase supplies for his ranch, but Grace noticed he never seemed to need very much. He would lean against the counter and talk with her while she worked, telling her stories about his cattle operation, his 2 ranch hands who bickered like an old married couple, the time a rattlesnake got into the bunkhouse and caused absolute chaos. Grace found herself looking forward to these visits, to the sound of his laugh and the way his eyes crinkled at the corners. One Saturday afternoon, 6 weeks after he had found her in the desert, Xavier asked if she would like to see his ranch. "It's not much," he said quickly. Just a small operation about 5 miles north of town. But I thought you might enjoy getting out of the city for a bit. The ride would do you good, and I promise to have you back before dark so folks do not talk." Grace knew she should decline. She had no business spending time alone with a man, no matter how kind he had been. But she discovered that she desperately wanted to see Xavier's ranch, to understand the place that had shaped him. "I would like that," she said. They rode out early Sunday morning, Grace on a gentle mare Xavier had borrowed from a friend. The ranch was indeed small but well maintained, with a sturdy adobe house, a barn, corrals, and several hundred head of cattle grazing on the scrubby rangeland. Xavier's 2 ranch hands, Pete and Gomez, greeted Grace with respectful nods and knowing smiles that made her blush. Xavier showed her everything. The cattle he was so proud of, the spring that provided water year-round, the garden he was attempting to coax into existence behind the house. He had built this place himself over the past 8 years, he explained, starting with nothing but a land grant and determination. "It's beautiful," Grace said honestly, standing on the porch and looking out at the land stretching to the horizon. "It's lonely," Xavier said, and there was something in his voice that made her turn to look at him. He was watching her with an intensity that made her heart race. "I built this place thinking I'd fill it with a family someday, but the right woman never came along. Or maybe I just was not looking in the right places." Grace felt heat rise to her cheeks that had nothing to do with the sun. "Xavier, I know it's too soon," he said quickly. "I know you've been through a lot and you need time. But I need you to know that when I found you in that desert, it felt like providence. Like maybe I had been riding that particular stretch of nothing for a reason. These past weeks, getting to know you, they've been the best I can remember. You're smart and brave and stronger than you give yourself credit for. And I find myself thinking about you at the oddest times, wondering what you're doing, hoping you're happy." Grace's throat felt tight. No one had ever spoken to her this way, with such raw honesty and respect. "I think about you too," she admitted. "More than I should, probably. You saved my life, Xavier, but it's more than gratitude. When I'm with you, I feel safe. I feel seen. Like maybe I do have a place in this world after all." Xavier stepped closer, close enough that she could see the flecks of gold in his green eyes. "You do have a place. Right here if you want it. I am not a wealthy man and this life is hard sometimes. But I promise you would never have to run again. You would never have to be afraid or alone. I would spend every day making sure you knew you were valued and cherished." "We have only known each other 6 weeks, Grace whispered, but her heart was singing. "I have heard of people getting engaged after knowing each other for 6 days. Besides, when you know, you know. I knew the moment I saw you fighting to survive in that desert that you were someone special. I knew when you insisted on paying your own way that you had pride and integrity. I knew when you laughed at my terrible jokes that I wanted to hear that sound for the rest of my life." Grace felt tears spilling down her cheeks. "I have nothing to offer you, no dowry, no family connections, nothing but myself." "That's everything," Xavier said simply. He reached up and gently wiped away her tears with his thumb. "That's all I want, Grace, just you. Your laughter, your strength, your company. The way you hum while you work, the way you're kind to everyone, even the cranky prospectors who come into the mercantile. The way you see the beauty in small things. That's worth more than all the gold in California." "Yes," Grace breathed. Xavier blinked. "Yes. Yes, I want this. I want you. I want a life here, a home, a future. I want to wake up every morning knowing I belong somewhere, and I want that somewhere to be with you." The smile that broke across Xavier's face was like sunrise. He swept her into his arms, lifting her off her feet and spinning her around while she laughed. When he set her down, he cupped her face in his work-roughened hands and kissed her, gentle and reverent, like she was something precious. Grace kissed him back, pouring all her hope and fear and longing into the moment, and when they finally broke apart, they were both breathing hard. "We should do this properly," Xavier said. "Let me court you the right way. I will talk to Dr. Morrison, since he seems to be the closest thing you have to a guardian in town. We will have a respectable engagement period so people do not gossip. And then, when you're ready, we will get married and start our life together." Grace nodded, feeling dizzy with happiness. "That sounds perfect." They rode back to town in the golden afternoon light, holding hands whenever the trail was wide enough for the horses to walk side by side. Xavier left her at Mrs. Chen's boarding house with a chaste kiss on the cheek and a promise to call on her the next evening. The engagement period was 3 months of sweet torture. Xavier courted her with old-fashioned propriety, calling on her at the boarding house under Mrs. Chen's watchful eye, taking her to church socials and community dances. He brought her wildflowers and wrote her earnest letters even though they saw each other nearly every day. Grace treasured every moment, every word, every stolen touch of hands. She also used the time to make herself a proper wedding dress, working on it in the evenings in her room. Mrs. Chen, who had become something of a friend, helped her with the more intricate stitching. The other women in the boarding house contributed lace and ribbons, turning the creation of the dress into a communal project that made Grace feel embraced by a community for the first time in her life. Dr. Morrison gave his blessing to the match, and Father Rodriguez at the San Elizario Chapel agreed to perform the ceremony. Pete and Gomez spruced up the ranch house, whitewashing the walls and building new furniture for the bedroom. Xavier ordered a real cook stove from the Sears catalog and had it shipped by rail, an extravagant expense that made Grace cry when she saw it. "You deserve nice things," Xavier said firmly, "and I want you to have them." They were married on a bright October morning with half the town in attendance. Grace wore her white dress with her dark hair pinned up and crowned with wildflowers. Xavier wore a new suit that made him look impossibly handsome, though he kept tugging at the collar. When Father Rodriguez pronounced them husband and wife, Xavier kissed her with a tenderness that made the assembled crowd sigh. The reception was held at the ranch, with tables of food and barrels of beer and a fiddler who played late into the night. Grace danced with her husband, with Pete and Gomez, with Dr. Morrison, and even with Mr. Peterson from the Mercantile. She felt like she was floating, like the whole day was a dream she might wake from at any moment. But it was not a dream. When the last guests finally departed and the stars filled the sky, Xavier carried her over the threshold of their home, and Grace knew with absolute certainty that she had finally found where she belonged. Their first year of marriage was not easy, but it was good. Grace learned the rhythms of ranch life, discovering she had a knack for animal husbandry and a surprising talent for mending fence. Xavier taught her to ride properly and to shoot a rifle, insisting she needed to be able to protect herself when he was out on the range. They worked side by side from dawn to dusk, building their life together, one fence post and one head of cattle at a time. At night, they would sit on the porch and watch the sunset paint the desert in impossible colors. Xavier would tell her about his dreams for the ranch, about expanding the herd and maybe one day running horses as well as cattle. Grace would share her own hopes about improving the house and planting a real garden and filling the empty bedrooms with children. "How many children were you thinking?" Xavier asked one evening, his arm around her shoulders. "At least 3, Grace said. "I always wanted siblings when I was growing up. I do not want our children to be lonely." 3 sounds perfect. 2 boys and a girl, or 2 girls and a boy, or whatever the Lord blesses us with, I suppose. Grace leaned her head against his shoulder. However they come, they will be loved. That's what matters. They will be the luckiest children in Texas, Xavier said, having you for a mother and you for a father. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars emerge one by one, and Grace marveled at how far she had come. A year ago, she had been dying in the desert, convinced her life was over. Now she was sitting beside the man she loved more than breathing, planning a future that seemed impossibly bright. Their first child came in the spring of 1884, a squalling baby boy they named James. Xavier cried when he held his son for the first time, and Grace felt her heart might burst from the fullness of it all. James had his father's green eyes and his mother's dark hair, and he was absolutely perfect. Grace proved to be a natural mother, patient and loving but also practical. Xavier was a devoted father, carrying James around the ranch from the time he could hold his head up, talking to him about cattle and horses and the land. Pete and Gomez became honorary uncles, teaching James to whistle and whittle and all manner of mischief. 14 months after James came Sarah, a tiny girl with her father's smile and a fierce determination that showed up early. And then, 2 years after Sarah, came Thomas, an easy baby who seemed content to observe the world with solemn eyes. The house that had seemed too big for 2 people was suddenly full to bursting with noise and love and chaos. Grace fell into bed exhausted every night and woke every morning grateful. Xavier expanded the cattle operation and hired more hands, building their little ranch into something substantial. They were not wealthy, but they were comfortable, and more importantly, they were happy. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Xavier surprised Grace with a trip back to the spot where he had found her. They left the children with Mrs. Chen, who had become their children's adopted grandmother, and rode out into the desert at dawn. Grace had not been back to this place since that terrible day, and she felt a superstitious dread as they approached. But Xavier kept his hand on hers, steady and sure, and when they reached the spot, he helped her down from her horse. "I wanted you to see it again," Xavier said. "Not as a place of despair, but as a place of beginnings. This is where our life started, Grace. This is where I found the greatest treasure of my life." Grace looked around at the barren landscape, remembering her hopelessness, her certainty that she was going to die. It seemed like another lifetime, like it had happened to someone else entirely. "I was so lost," she whispered. "I had given up on everything." "I know, but you survived. You fought and you survived, and when I found you, there was still breath in you, still hope, even if you could not see it. And look at what you have made of that second chance. Look at the life you have built, the children you have raised, the home you have created. You turned a moment of despair into a lifetime of joy." Grace turned to face her husband, this man who had saved her in every way a person could be saved. His hair had threads of silver now, and there were lines around his eyes from squinting at the sun, but he was still the most beautiful thing she had ever seen. "I love you," she said. "I loved you from that first moment, I think, even though I did not know it yet. You gave me back my life, Xavier. You gave me hope and home and purpose. You gave me everything. You gave me just as much," Xavier said. He pulled a small box from his pocket and opened it to reveal a delicate silver necklace with a small turquoise stone. "I have been carrying this around for weeks, waiting for the right moment. It is not much, but the stone is the same color as the sky was the day I found you. I want you to wear it and remember that even in the darkest moments, there is always hope. Where there is breath, there is a way." Grace let him fasten the necklace around her throat, then kissed him with all the passion of a woman who knew how precious love was, how easily it could be lost, how carefully it must be treasured. They returned to the ranch that evening to find their children waiting anxiously on the porch. James, now 10 years old, had attempted to cook dinner with predictably chaotic results. Sarah, 8, had set the table with the good china and broken 2 plates. Thomas, 6, had been drawing pictures of horses on every available surface. Mrs. Chen had clearly given up trying to maintain order and was simply supervising the chaos with amused tolerance. Papa, Mama, the children swarmed them, talking over each other about their day's adventures and misadventures. Xavier caught Sarah as she launched herself at him, while James showed Grace his latest treasure, a perfectly intact snake skin. Thomas clung to her skirt, asking if they had brought presents. "The present is that we came back," Grace said, ruffling his hair. "Did you think we would not?" "Sarah said you might get lost in the desert like in Papa's story," Thomas said solemnly. "Your Papa would never let me get lost," Grace assured him. "And I would never let him get lost either. We are a team, your Papa and I. We take care of each other." That night, after the children were finally asleep and Mrs. Chen had returned to town, Grace and Xavier sat on their porch once more, watching the familiar stars wheel overhead. Rust the horse, now elderly and retired, dozed in the nearby corral. The wind carried the scent of sage and possibility. "Do you ever regret it?" Xavier asked quietly. "Staying here instead of going somewhere bigger, somewhere with more opportunities?" "Not for a single moment," Grace said firmly. "This is where I belong, with you, with our children on this land. This is my home, Xavier. The first real home I have ever had. Why would I want to be anywhere else? I just want you to be happy." "I am happy. I am so happy I sometimes cannot believe it is real. I spent so long thinking I did not deserve happiness, that it was not meant for people like me, but you taught me different. You taught me that everyone deserves a chance, a home, a person who sees them and values them. You gave me all of that and more." Xavier pulled her close, and they sat together in the darkness, 2 people who had found each other against all odds and built something beautiful from nothing. The years continued to pass, bringing challenges and joys in equal measure. There was the drought of 1889 that tested every rancher in the territory, but that they survived through careful planning and sheer stubbornness. There was the winter of 1891, when influenza swept through El Paso, and Grace nursed half the town back to health, drawing on reserves of strength she had not known she possessed. There was the day James turned 18 and announced he wanted to go to college in Austin, and Grace had to let her baby go while being proud of the man he had become. Sarah grew into a skilled horsewoman who could rope and ride as well as any of the ranch hands. She had no interest in the domestic arts, preferring to spend her days on horseback checking fences and moving cattle. Grace supported her daughter's independence, knowing firsthand how important it was for a woman to have options and agency. Thomas surprised everyone by showing an aptitude for business. At 12, he was keeping the ranch books and finding ways to increase their profits through better marketing of their beef. Xavier joked that Thomas would probably end up owning half of Texas before he was 30. In 1896, when Grace was 36 and Xavier was 42, they welcomed an unexpected 4th child, a daughter they named Rose. Her arrival shook up the family's comfortable routines but brought a fresh wave of joy to the household. Sarah, 16 and fiercely independent, proved to be surprisingly maternal with her baby sister. Thomas, 12, appointed himself Rose's official protector, and James, home from university for the summer, could not stop marveling at how tiny she was. "Was I ever that small?" he asked, cradling Rose with careful hands. "Smaller, actually," Grace said. "You were early and skinny as a rail. I could hold you in one hand. It is hard to imagine. I feel like I have always been big and clumsy. You have never been clumsy, just enthusiastic." Grace smiled at her eldest son, this young man who had Xavier's height and her determination. "I am so proud of you, James. The man you have become, the education you are pursuing. You are going to do great things. I just want to make you and Papa proud. You already have, every single day." Xavier had gone gray by then, and his joints ached on cold mornings, but he was still strong and capable. He had built the Quinn Ranch into one of the most successful operations in West Texas, known for quality cattle and fair dealing. But his greatest pride was not the ranch or the cattle or the money in the bank. It was his family. On Sunday afternoons, when the work was done and the children were occupied, Xavier and Grace would still ride out to their special spot in the desert. It had become a tradition over the years, a way to reconnect and remember where they had started. Grace would sit on the ground where she had once waited to die, and Xavier would sit beside her, and they would talk about everything and nothing. "Do you think about what your life would have been like if I had not found you?" Xavier asked one day when Rose was 2 and the older children were all in town. "Sometimes," Grace admitted, "but it is like trying to imagine being a completely different person. That woman who was dying in the desert, she was not really me, or maybe she was who I would have become if you had not given me the chance to be someone else, someone better. You were always good, Grace. I did not make you that way. I just gave you a safe place to show it. You gave me everything. A home, a family, a purpose. You gave me love when I thought I was unlovable. You saw worth in me when I had none to offer. That day you found me when you said where there is breath there is a way, you were not just talking about surviving. You were talking about living, really living, and you showed me how." Xavier took her hand, his weathered fingers intertwining with hers. "We showed each other. I was surviving before I met you, Grace, but I was not living either. I was just going through the motions, building this ranch for some theoretical future that never seemed to arrive. You made it real. You filled this place with laughter and love and meaning. You made the hard work worth it. You made everything worth it." They sat in silence for a while, watching the clouds drift across the endless Texas sky. A hawk circled overhead, and somewhere in the distance, cattle lowed. It was a peaceful moment, full of the comfortable quiet of two people who knew each other completely. "I want to be buried here," Grace said suddenly. "When my time comes, right here where you found me. Is that strange?" "Not strange at all," Xavier said. "Though I would prefer we not think about that for another 50 years or so," Grace laughed. "I am not planning on going anywhere, but still. When the time comes, this place feels sacred to me. It is where my real life began. Then that is where you will rest," Xavier promised, "and I will rest beside you. We started together here and we will finish together here." But that was far in the future. For now, they had a ranch to run and children to raise and a life to live. They rode back home as the sun began its descent, arriving to find Sarah teaching Rose to sit on a very patient pony while Thomas calculated something in a ledger and shook his head over the numbers. James had returned to university, but his presence was felt in the careful improvements he had suggested before leaving, the new irrigation system that would make the garden more productive. That evening, the family gathered for dinner around the large table Xavier had built years ago. Grace looked around at her children, at her husband, at the home they had created together, and felt a wave of gratitude so intense it brought tears to her eyes. "Mama, why are you crying?" Rose asked, her small face concerned. "Happy tears, sweetheart," Grace assured her. "Sometimes people cry when they are very, very happy." "Are you very, very happy?" "I am. I am the happiest woman in the world." Xavier caught her eye across the table and smiled, that same smile that had greeted her when she opened her eyes in the desert all those years ago. And Grace smiled back, knowing without question that she was exactly where she was meant to be. The years turned into decades. James graduated from university and became a teacher in El Paso, marrying a sweet-natured woman named Rebecca and giving Grace and Xavier their first grandchildren. Sarah shocked everyone by falling in love with a traveling photographer named Henry and moving to Santa Fe, where she opened a gallery showcasing images of the West. Thomas took over the day-to-day running of the ranch, his business acumen transforming it into an even more profitable enterprise. And Rose, their unexpected blessing, grew into a compassionate young woman who became a nurse, determined to help people the way her mother once had. Grace and Xavier grew old together gracefully, their love deepening with each passing year. They celebrated 50 years of marriage in 1932, with their children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren gathered at the ranch. Grace was 72 then, her dark hair completely silver, but her eyes were still bright with life and love. Xavier was 78, his body bent with age but his spirit unbroken. At the party, surrounded by the family they had created, Xavier stood and asked for everyone's attention. The crowd quieted, 3 generations turning to look at the patriarch. "I just want to say a few words," Xavier said, his voice still strong despite his age. 50 years ago, I married the most remarkable woman I have ever known. Grace, you have been my partner, my best friend, my greatest adventure. You turned this ranch into a home and me into a better man. Everything good in my life stems from the day I found you in that desert. You were fighting to survive, refusing to give up even when you had every reason to. And you have been fighting ever since, not for yourself but for all of us. You fought to build this family, to create a legacy of love and strength that will outlast both of us. I love you more today than I did 50 years ago, and I will love you for whatever time we have left." Grace stood, tears streaming down her face, and kissed her husband to the applause and cheers of their descendants. "I love you too," she whispered. "Always." They had 5 more years together, 5 precious years of watching their family grow and prosper. Xavier passed first, peacefully in his sleep on a warm summer night in 1937. Grace held his hand as he slipped away, and her last words to him were a promise. "I will see you soon, my love. Wait for me." She joined him the following spring, on a day when the wildflowers were blooming across the desert. True to Xavier's promise, they were buried together in the spot where he had found her, where their story had begun. A simple stone marked the grave, with words Grace had requested years before. "Here lies Grace and Xavier Quinn. Where there was breath, they found a way." Their children and grandchildren gathered for the funeral, sharing stories of love and laughter, of hard work and harder times overcome together. They spoke of a woman who had lost everything and built it all back through sheer determination and grace. They spoke of a man who had seen someone in need and given everything to help her. They spoke of a love that had endured for more than 5 decades, a love that had created a family and a legacy that would continue for generations. As the sun set over the Texas desert that day, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold and purple, the family stood together around the grave. And if anyone had been listening very carefully, they might have heard something in the wind, something that sounded like laughter and whispered promises, and the eternal hope of 2 souls who had found each other against all odds and refused to ever let go. The ranch continued under Thomas's capable management, and then under his children, and then under their children. The Quinn family became a fixture in El Paso, known for their integrity and their commitment to community. They never forgot where they came from, never forgot the story of how their family began with a dying woman and a cowboy who refused to ride past someone in need. Every year on the anniversary of Grace and Xavier's meeting, the family would gather at the desert grave site. They would bring wildflowers and tell the story once more, making sure the youngest generation understood what their great-great-grandparents had built. They would talk about hope and second chances, and the power of love to transform lives. And the story lived on, passed down through the decades, a testament to the truth that where there is breath, there is always a way. Grace had been dying when Xavier found her, convinced her story was over. But it had only been beginning. Everything that came after, the love and the family and the life they built together, it all started in that moment when a cowboy looked down at a woman in the dust and decided she was worth saving. She had lost all hope when the cowboy found her. He said, "Where there is breath, there is a way." And together, they proved it true, building a love that would echo through generations and a legacy that would never fade. Their story became legend in West Texas, a reminder that even in the darkest moments, even when all seems lost, there is always hope. There is always a way forward. There is always the possibility of love waiting just over the horizon, if only we have the courage to keep breathing, keep fighting, keep hoping for one more day.